just taking it one day at a time. Because some days are going to feel great and you're going to be like, yeah, we are rocking this thing. I got this. And then the next day, you're going to be like, what the fuck is happening? Welcome to the Vibrantly You podcast. We're your hosts, Megan Martineau.
Caitlin Cipriano. In this podcast, we talk about fitness and nutrition on your motherhood journey. Whether you're trying to conceive, pregnant, postpartum, or beyond, you're welcome here.
Nothing is off limits, and our goal is to support you in this important season of life so that you can feel vibrantly you. As a reminder, this information is not medical advice. Please see the show notes for more details. Welcome back to the Vibrantly You podcast. Today, Caitlin and I are going to be talking about the transition from 1 to 2 kids. So, this is a transition we both went through basically at the same time. Caitlin's youngest is 2 weeks older than my youngest, and it was really a lot harder for both of us than we expected. So, today we're just going to be chatting about our own experiences and then try to give you a little bit of advice or tips if you are getting ready for this transition yourself, or maybe you're already going through it. So, to start, Caitlin, how about you tell us what some of your expectations were going into this transition from 1 to 2 kids?
I think what you hear is really mixed as far as what is harder, that transition from 0 to 1 or 1 to 2 plus. And I kind of envisioned that this transition was going to be easier because I had Luca right at the height of the pandemic. We just didn't have as much of a support system during this time, but I was definitely wrong in that, like, presumption because the transition from 1 to 2 kids was definitely a lot harder and something that I really struggled with. I think in reflecting now that I've gotten over the hump, I think, with certain things, that almost it felt like we were in this bubble during the pandemic. It was just Luca, my husband, and I. It was kind of like nice and cozy feeling almost. And even though we didn't have that same support system, like physically there from our families, we weren't working to the same capacity that is typical now. And I didn't really take that into consideration. At the time, my husband and I were both working in different school systems. And so we weren't really there. Like, we were working from home, which was really not not much. So even though I only had like 8 weeks of paid maternity time, I really was off of work for, I don't know, like 6 to 8
Yeah.
months. Like, it just was, you can't do athletic training with high school athletes really from your computer. So
Right.
I was just enjoying motherhood. I really didn't have that many other external stressors at that time.
Yeah.
And when Gianna was born, as in a much different role, both from like our family perspective, but also from a job perspective, because I am self-employed, I have clients that I'm working with. I couldn't really take much time off. I took like 2 weeks, I think, and then I was really just going back to work. I mean, I was holding Gianna, meeting with clients on Zoom, and even though we had, help, Derek had time off to be supportive. We had our parents that were able to, again, physically be there more. The, like, mental load was just so significantly higher, and I don't know if you experienced that in the transition too, but I was okay initially, but then, I want to say maybe in that like 6 to 8 month time frame, I started feeling really overwhelmed and almost like I was in a fog. Like I was in a fog. And this is when I was like, I think this is like postpartum mood disorder stuff. This isn't just like me being overwhelmed. And so I did reach out to a therapist and got help and just I because I didn't again really deal with that with Luca, that was like not something that I was anticipating to pop up in my postpartum
Yeah.
journey this second time.
Well, and I feel like you brought up a really good point too, just how drastically different the world was
Yeah.
between both births. And I was in the same boat because my oldest, my son, is about 6 months younger than yours. So it was September of 2020 when he was born. So we were like not in COVID like we were for you when you gave birth in
Sure.
March, but still, like people weren't doing the same level of activities and like social
Yeah.
things as normal. So we were kind of in the same boat where we were in this little bubble. Our families don't live near us, so we didn't have people coming over. We weren't doing things. Same thing, like we were both working from home. So it was a totally different experience. And I think that's definitely something to take into account when you're having expectations, right, for your second baby. When you're like, "Oh, I've been here, done this before. I know what I'm getting into," but then not taking into account the fact that everything's different. It's not
And
even
I
remotely the
didn't.
same. Yeah.
I don't know why that never crossed my mind like, oh, we are in a completely different time space.
Yeah.
Like this, I'm not in this little like bubble anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, I didn't really think about that either, honestly, until you just said that. I didn't think about that at all because my expectations also were like, yeah, this is going to be so easy. Like I said, I've done this before. I felt like with my son, the hardest part about that 0 to 1 transition was I've never had a baby before. I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like everything he did freaked us out. I remember when we first came home, Ethan was trying to change his diaper and the pee, just shoots straight up. It's all over the place. I'm recovering from the C-section. So I'm just like on the couch. I'm like, what are you doing? He's peeing and we're like yelling at each other because the baby's peeing into the air. Like silly things like that. You just get so overwhelmed with that first baby because you have no clue what you're doing. So
Totally.
even like when my daughter was born, like that first night in the hospital, we're like, wow, this is so much better. We're so much more relaxed. We don't feel anxious or nervous. Like we really feel like we got this. And I feel like that feeling maybe lasted for even like that first night home.
Yeah, Mm.
And that was it.
totally. I can relate. I feel that same similar feeling in in the hospital. It was like, okay, I've done this experience before. You're not as anxious about some of those like things that seem a little more trivial now than your first baby. But it is this whole different ball game, I think, once you do go home into that environment. And now, okay, you have a toddler or preschool aged kid that also is going through the change at the same time, welcoming in a sibling, even if it is a pretty like smooth transition for them, which I feel like Luca did a really good job with. He had his moments,
Yeah.
of course, but it was like he really just like loved his sister from when they first met. And but it's like, okay, how do you navigate doing like two different bedtimes and with this, you're maybe nursing a baby while you eat dinner in a recliner and your family's in the kitchen. Just all these little like things that you wouldn't have at least I didn't think of beforehand as being impactful to like your environment really do like again add up as you
Yeah.
grow.
Did you do anything preemptively to like prepare before she was born? Or were you just kind of like, we're gonna wing this, see how it goes?
I think it was mostly winging it. I think there was a few things we did, think of intentionally in terms of planning. My husband luckily has a very flexible work schedule, and so he was actually able to take those like initial 2 weeks off to just be home, not working. But then he saved the rest of his paternity time for the fall season when he went back to work, where he was able to work half days for that.
Yeah.
So he was able to stay home, really primarily be there for Luca and to help take things off of my plate. And so that was huge. So that was the one thing I think we did plan really well, and that was helpful.
Yeah, for us, yeah, my husband had 8 weeks off of paid paternity leave, so that was great. And I did hear from people too. I think a lot of people talk about this, like having the baby bring the older child a gift. And I've actually seen like conflicting things about this. Like now, sometimes people are like, don't do that. But some people are still like, yeah, do it. And I think it's something that's been around forever because my grandmother was even telling me, like,
Oh,
oh,
really?
yeah. Yeah, she was like, oh, yeah, we did this with, because she had 5 kids. We did this with all the kids. So I was like, okay. I can't even remember now what the baby brought my toddler, but we did do that. And I also was trying to think ahead to what can he do when I am nursing or pumping, because I was also not sure what our breastfeeding journey was going to look like because with my
Right.
oldest, we tried nursing at about 2 weeks postpartum. I did switch to exclusively pumping because it just wasn't working for either one of us. So I really wanted to make breastfeeding work the second time, but I was like, I kind of have to prepare for both situations because I don't know. So I was like, okay, what's he gonna do if I'm pumping? Because then I also have to find something for the baby to do when I'm pumping. So what's that gonna look like? Or if I am nursing, I also still need something for him. So I was trying to think ahead of time. What are some fun activities, like high preference toys that we can bring out during that time so he feels like all the attention is not on the baby?
Yeah,
But those were really the only two things we did to
really.
prepare.
Yeah, I didn't think about that piece ahead of time when nursing in terms of, oh, what activities should we do? But we figured it out. And I think being able to have, again, like you said, like high preferential activities that they really like and can be engaged with, for 20 minutes or so is definitely a good thing to think about.
Yeah. So we've both already kind of talked about this a little bit, but let's really dive into what that initial transition felt like. So, how did that feel for you? You come home from the hospital, you introduce the kids to each other. Kind of how do those first couple weeks go?
I feel like it was mixed in a way. There were pieces that felt really natural and positive as far as transition goes, but I also have, like, some vivid memories where, like, oof, like, this is really hard, and some of those things were I remember my husband's, like, like, immediate family all came over, I think, maybe a few days after we got home from the hospital to meet the baby. Just, like, a lot, and something that, again, we didn't do during COVID, which was really nice. Not just, like, we love them, but in that moment, it was just really overwhelming, and I just remember feeling so exhausted and so like shitty after they left. And I was like, I wish that had not been a thing or it had been postponed a few weeks. So depending on the type of person you are, I would maybe see if you can skip that,
Yeah.
it's just a lot. Um,
Yeah, that sounds rough. I thankfully, like I said, because we don't have family that lives nearby besides my sister. And at the time, she lived right next to us. So she actually had watched my son. So when we came home, we didn't have him come to the hospital to see us because we knew he'd be so upset having to leave. So we're like, we'll just skip that. He's having fun at home with her.
yeah.
So we came home and she was here and also one of our good friends. So it was kind of like walking in and like he's meeting the baby and my sister's there and our friend's there. And even though they were so supportive, it wasn't like, give me the
Yes.
baby. I want to hold the baby. I was still like,
No.
oh, this is a lot right away. And then we had the dog too, and she's kind of freaking out, like, what is this thing? But yeah,
Mhm.
once we kind of like settled into things, I feel like initially that first, like I said, that first day or two, we were like, this is great. We got this. And then like all hell broke loose pretty much.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the other thing too, again, that was a rough point, and I think, like you said, after that initial settling in, it was really hard to divide, like, time and attention between the baby and the toddler. I felt like I was missing out on so many things with
Mhm.
Luca initially, and that was really hard, and that's still, I think, a piece I have to, like, work on forgiving myself for. Like, I feel really guilty about parts of that period, sort of the first, like, 8 to 10 months, I felt like were really difficult with that, and, of course, like, my husband was really great over it was she was born during the summer, and he would take him to go biking and stuff, but I always felt like we were divided into 2.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it feels like your family is kind of split in half, and you're always with the baby, especially if you're nursing or like cluster feeding in the beginning. I know for both of us, we were doing contact naps all the time in those first few months, and that makes it so challenging too.
Yeah. Yeah, the contact napping was really hard, and it got better. We got better with contact napping,
Yeah.
anymore, but again, I would say, like, that first up through, like, 8 to 10 months with that kind of thing was really hard, and Gianna's personality is, like, she really takes a long time to warm up to people. And so even though my mom was coming to help a couple times a week with the kids, Gianna didn't want to be with my mom, especially like that 4 months through 10 months to a year. Like she really did not want to be with anyone besides me or my husband. And that was really like strenuous on me.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of anxiety about leaving her, like hearing her cry and being distraught. And again, much better place now. My mom's one of her favorite people, but it just again, her personality, that made it really tough. She's not one of those, like, chill babies that can just be handed off
Yeah.
to just anybody.
It's so funny because I feel like both of our daughters, again, they're 2 weeks apart. They're both cancers, both born in July. Very strong personalities. And they're like feisty. And it's so funny because Caitlin and I text each other. We're like, are you experiencing this? Yup. Like we're living the same life with these girls. But yeah, same thing. It's like she always wanted to be attached to me, and that made it so difficult. Like even if my husband was like, I'll take her and you can go spend time, with the older one, she's like screaming at the top of her lungs. And then I'm like, I can't even enjoy myself now because now I'm like, oh, I should be with her. But then I feel guilt because I also want to spend time with my other kid. I do feel like that was the hardest thing, just being like, I can't be in both places at once, and I don't know how to fix this. I mean, you can't fix it. I do feel like now, with them being 17 months old, almost 18 months old, it's so different now because the kids
Yes.
can play together, and even just watching them bond and interact, and like she just looks up to him like he is her whole
Yeah.
world and just loves him so much, and it just like completely melts my heart. I'm like, this is the best thing ever. It's like making me teary right now thinking about it. But
Oh,
those first few months were just, like you said, the first 8 to 10 months really were just so challenging. And I feel like a lot of people do say, oh, yeah, 1 to 2 was so much easier for me. And I just heard everyone saying that all the time. So I really went into it thinking it was going to be a walk in the park. And it could just be, like I said, our daughters are feisty little girls. It could just be their personalities made it a little like maybe if you have a really chill baby, it's easier.
yeah.
Not my experience. My baby's not chill. So,
No.
but yeah, it was hard and not what I expected. But like we
Yeah.
got through it. It got easier. But yeah, that dividing attention, I think, is the hardest part. And that guilt, like you were saying.
Yeah. I think those are the big things. And yeah, just feeling like feeling like you're doing everything you can, but it's just not enough. And also, I think the other part that's hard is trying again, like we're both self-employed and trying to navigate like mom brain and work brain and having to do them a lot of the time simultaneously. And you just feel like you have all of these different tabs open and you're never turn like they're never getting totally turned off on either side. That was something that was also really challenging trying to figure out like how can I have some separation here with things. And I still don't totally have that down, but it is a little bit better.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I know we're planning to do a whole podcast episode on that too, being moms and business owners working from home while having kids home, because I know we're definitely not alone in that experience and just sharing the complexities of that. But I know we've been talking about the hard parts. What would you say would be like the best advice that you could give to someone who is getting ready to go through this transition?
Yeah, I think obviously you can never plan for everything and things are going to pop up, but I think giving yourself a good like support system that can where you feel comfortable asking for help and that you can feel comfortable with again, even though in my experience things were still challenging. It did have really good support from my husband, my mom, knowing when I needed to ask for help and see a therapist, just giving yourself grace, but also knowing, okay, when can I ask for help to take things off or be helpful? I think that's my biggest piece of advice. Like, don't feel like something's just normal because you're postpartum or going through this really challenging, potentially challenging experience. Know what your threshold levels are for things, knowing yourself and when to ask for help.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I was seeing a therapist the whole time, like even when I was pregnant. So, like, straight through into postpartum. And I feel like that was so helpful also with the transition. So, I love that you mentioned that. And yeah, I think also just trying to release that guilt too, because like we said, like you can't be in two places at once. But if you have that support system and people surrounding you and asking for help and getting the help, knowing that both kids are well taken care of, like you don't need to be guilty. obviously it's going to be there still, but trying to release that as much as you can because you're doing a great job. And I think the only thing I would add is just taking it one day at a time because some days are going to feel great and you're going to be like, yeah, we are rocking this thing. I got this. And then the next day you're going to be like, what the fuck is happening? This is not what I signed up for.
Absolutely.
I still have those
Sometimes
days.
sometimes those feelings pop up within the same hour of each other too, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Exactly. It's always going to be changing, but I also think there is like what's the word I'm looking for? I do feel like that's a like a bright spot or or like reassurance. Like, okay, it sucks right now, but probably in a couple hours it's going to be great and they're going to be getting along and everything's going to be fine. So like knowing that it is just like ever changing and evolving and it won't be like that forever, even though it feels like it in the moment. And I think that's why we wanted to do this episode too, because again, there's not a lot of people talking about how hard this is. At least I feel like in my experience, I always am seeing people saying this transition was so easy. And since that was not the case for us, that was why we wanted to do this episode. So if you are somebody out there that's struggling with this, no, you're not alone. We've been there. We're still there. But you're going to get through it. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, absolutely. I would mirror that message 100%. And we hope this conversation was really helpful. Again, especially if you're someone that's going through this transition right now and it does feel really hard, but we promise that you'll get through it. But don't be afraid to ask for help if you feel like you're really struggling. And the just like more repetitions and practice that you have with your kids and with your family, um, the easier it will get. So, uh, stick with yourself. And if you like this episode, please be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts and leave us a review. We really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you guys next week.